pleased to be joined by former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman to discuss this issue and quite a few issues a little bit more. Campbell, this week Tennis Australia CEO and Australian Open Tournament Director Craig Tiley again distanced the sport from Margaret Court. Are they incapable of just celebrating a tennis legend without, in the same sentence, condemning her? What does it matter what she preaches at her church? She is being celebrated for her sporting achievements.
Well, Rita, great to be with you, and absolutely I agree with your sentiments, and your little editorial prior to the news is bang on. You know, she's a great tennis player. She's done amazing things for the sport and for our nation, and we should celebrate those achievements. And Tennis Australia, the people who should be at the forefront of celebrating those achievements. I don't know why they don't get that they can actually, if this is the issue for them, distance themselves from her views while still actually celebrating those achievements. And that's what they should try to do here. I mean, the fact that they wholeheartedly embrace her and put her up there in the pedestal at a significant time is critically important. But I don't think it means that they can't also say, well, look, but by the way, we don't actually agree with her, because
yeah, but they've gone a lot further than that, Campbell.
Earlier on. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Sorry, go on.
That's the point. That's the problem here. Well, that's the problem here, and they didn't need to. Yeah, they, like most Australians, majority of Australians don't support her views. You effectively don't support her views, from what you said before. I certainly didn't. I certainly voted for gay marriage myself. I don't support her views, but I totally respect and will fight, like you, for her right to speak her views. And let me just try something else with you here. You know, there are many figures in history, in Australia, for example, in the United States, where the views of those individuals, and they're iconic figures, you bring them forward to today, and there are elements of their background, the things they thought and believed and said at the time, which are inappropriate by today's standard. This is the trouble with the left-wing view of these things. They want to sort of rewrite history. It's Orwellian. It's about rewriting. It's about whitewashing. It's about shutting things down. But you know, let me just try this one. There are former Labor Prime Ministers from 60, 70, 80, 90 years ago whose views are totally unacceptable in today's society, but they're still celebrated, they're still applauded for the leadership role and the achievements at the time.
Oh, absolutely. And I've no issue with Tennis Australia saying we don't support her views, but they don't leave it at that. They released this absurd open letter or press release where they just slammed her in this really, I don't know, just emotional, colourful, over-the-top language. In the same press release where they were announcing that they were going to recognise her, and they spent more time condemning her than actually mentioning the reasons for why there was going to be this acknowledgement of her next week. I just find the entire phenomenon bizarre, and you can't keep on talking about inclusiveness and tolerance and then treat people like they're pariahs.
It's cowardly. It's cowardly, Rita, because what they're really showing is they have this desperate need to tell, you know, the sponsors of the sport that, hey, you know, we don't agree with her, blah, blah, blah. Whereas what they should be saying is the sort of stuff we're talking about. They should be pushing back to the sponsor and say, look, of course we don't support her views, but this is her legacy to the sport and it has to be recognised. And that's what we stand for at the end of the day as Tennis Australia. That is a principled stand which really is quite sustainable, but they just don't have the intestinal fortitude, it seems, to do so.
Absolutely. And, you know, why not talk about, when we're talking so much these days about women in sport and female empowerment, why not talk about some of the groundbreaking achievements that she managed to accomplish during her career? The fact that she was the first woman to give birth and then come back to the sport and win Grand Slams. I mean, that was thought unthinkable before she did it. And I just don't understand why they don't at least focus on the things that are positive, that they can promote the sport and promote the Australian greats with, rather than fixating on issues of same-sex marriage that we've already had a vote on, and the majority won. Now, let's move on. I want to ask your opinion about the entire fiasco with Bridget McKenzie. Yesterday, we were hearing reports that she was gone. It was done and dusted. She's clinging on. How do you see this? Do you think she should fall on her sword? Is she doing the government great damage by clinging on, or should she wait to see what this inquiry reveals?
Well, let's just go back a step. The first thing is, and the problem here is, you've got an Auditor General's report which was very unfavourable to the process, and that immediately really put this into the league that it's in. Now, I'm prepared to believe that, you know, when the Secretary of PMC comes back with his report, that she might be cleared. The trouble is, and now I'm just talking about the politics of this now, because she's a very effective minister. I think she's a good person. But, you know, the bottom line, in the year 2020, in the political environment we're in, this stuff just goes on and on and on, and it doesn't stop. And the Prime Minister's basically facing now the prospect of going back to Parliament, and, well, isn't that going to be just a wonderful experience for the coalition? And,
but, okay, you know, I want to ask you, you've been...
So it's not going to go away is the point. And either she falls on a sword or she gets pushed out. And again, that would be very unfortunate, but that's the thing to do so that the government can take its narrative on. And it hasn't had a good 2 months because of the bushfires and all the controversy over that. The PM needed clear air, and he ain't going to get it at this rate.
But should she go because she's causing the government damage, or from what we already know, has she overstepped the mark to such an extent that her position really isn't tenable? You've been in local government, you've been in state government. Is what we're seeing, this sort of pork barrelling, is this how things are done, or is this something that is out of the ordinary and deserving of the criticism that it's receiving?
Well, I refer you to Graham Richardson's reported comments, which were that he used to do this and was a master of it, but he didn't get caught. Like, for example, Ross Kelly, and that is the thing. And I mean, look, you know, I could BS the viewers this afternoon and say whatever, but of course, of course this goes on. And look, let's just go back to democracy. At the end of the day, the people who get the votes and got the seats, and actually have people who have legitimate needs in their community, well, you know, one man's pork is another lady's great windfall for the local bowls club. I mean, yeah, that is how this has gone on forever. The thing is, though, really, if we want to go back to whether there's something that's been done that's wrong, it's if actually someone got money that never was on the list, or if someone didn't get money that really should have got money in terms of some ranking, and others, less deserving ones, clubs got the funds. So that's the sort of issue. But look, when I had ministers, I had 3 ministers I had to fire, and when I was Premier, and frankly, a couple of them went for less than this. And the reason they went is it was hurting the government. We couldn't get on with the agenda and had no clear air. And I had to sit down with them and say, look, you really have to go so we can get on with things. And I'm afraid that's where it's going. I don't want to see her gone, but maybe it's too late now.
I think you're suggesting she better take one for the team and step aside. It will be interesting.
Sometimes
because,
you do. Sometimes you do in politics. And toughing it out in 2020, well, good luck. Good luck.
Well, yeah, the media smell blood on this one, so they're not going to be letting go. You'll be seeing a new story on it every single day. Now, Jackie Trad, she was cleared of corruption back in September over a property she bought that would have benefited from a development she was in charge of. However, the Crime and Corruption Commission boss, Alan McSporan, will front Parliament to discuss his bombshell submission last week to a committee examining the legislative response to Jackie Trad's property scandal. Campbell, what is going on up in Queensland? This saga, I thought, was done and dusted, but it's reared its ugly head again.
Well, look, let's just dissect this into 2 sort of distinct parts. Firstly, the role of McSporan and the CCC, and then the actual legislation that's been contemplated. Firstly, the legislation. The only reason this has had to be contemplated is because the Premier didn't have the courage to fire Jackie Trad for failing to disclose the purchase of this investment property. Trad says that she didn't know her husband had purchased this property. Most Queenslanders, I think, would find that rather implausible. The Premier could have and should have fired Trad. So, as a result, anyway, the CCC recommended that there should be some sort of legislation. What I now have as an objection, though, is where you've got the government quite reasonably. So I'm going to surprise you. I'm actually backing the government's position as it stands at the moment. The Labor government, they put forward legislation that said there had to be a test of intent. So in other words, if a minister just made an honest mistake in not declaring something, they wouldn't go down. But you know, that's not good enough for the CCC. They're saying no, no, no. Even if someone makes a mistake, they can go. Whereas the government wanted to have a test in there about that it had to be willful, or it had to be some sort of intent to deceive. And I think that's reasonable, because the alternative, Rita, is that people are going to make mistakes, and good people, we lack good people in politics at the moment, and good people will see that there's even tougher penalties, huge implications for getting your paperwork wrong. And you could think of many examples across state and federal government where people do get the paperwork wrong, but here in Queensland, Mr McSporran wants people to go to jail. So let me turn to him then. He's far too vocal, far too active for someone in his role. He should be in the back rooms, administering the law, ensuring that a clean political system and government in Queensland. And I'm very concerned about the role that he's taking on, and particularly he's taking on the government. He's essentially trying to get his way on this legislation, the McSporran legislation, let's call it. I think it's dead wrong. And the Premier has every right to put forward what she has, and frankly the Leader of the Opposition should be supporting it, maybe with some amendments, but not just accepting the CCC, who are not elected by the people, who are not accountable, and they don't have to put up with what will be a terrible piece of legislation.
That's a turn up for the books right there. Campbell Newman coming out in support for the Queensland Labor government. I didn't expect you to say that, I've got to say. Now, I want to just lastly ask you about Resources Minister Matt Canavan, who's introducing a gas reservation policy. This is a report in today's Australian. The policy is going to ensure that we've got enough supplies for manufacturers and heavy industry, and introduce a price measure to the gas export trigger to ensure that the national market is operating efficiently. Is this necessary, this sort of intervention and these sort of policies? How do you see this proposal?
Well, firstly, up front, a bit of an admission, Rita, because when I was Premier, this was proposed in Queensland, and my cabinet and I considered this and actually rejected doing it. And with the passage of time, I've regretted that, because I think that knowing now what's transpired in terms of the gas market, I think it's an important thing, because we've got our gas being priced on international benchmark prices, and domestic consumers of gas are facing or have faced huge increases in costs. So if we want to have value-added manufacturing in this country, whether it be say fertiliser or production or any other sort of chemical-related industries, we actually have to have plentiful supplies of appropriately priced gas. Now, the other part of this puzzle, though, is, and I hope Matt Canavan continues to do what he's done in the past, which is to put pressure on the New South Wales and Victorian governments to overturn these ridiculous moratoriums on going after gas. There's lots of gas in Victoria, lots in New South Wales. It needs to be available to industry and to consumers, and I think it goes hand in glove with what Canavan's trying to do. So I hope the Premiers of New South Wales and Victoria will finally wake up and say, look, in the interests of the community, we have to make the case for opening up these gas resources.
Absolutely, I'm with you on that one. Thank you so much for joining us today, Campbell.